Welcome back to this Crossroads course. The topic for this lesson is the Restoration period. Lesson outline: Ezra, priest and scribe; Ezra, restoring the temple; Nehemiah, restoring Jerusalem; and Esther, preserving the nation. The last three historical books deal with the Restoration period. After the 70 years of captivity that Jeremiah predicted, Cyrus, ruler of the combined Median and Persian empires, conquered Babylon and issued a decree permitting the Jews to return to Palestine. Ezra, the restoration of the temple. The book of Ezra records the restoration of the nation from exile and the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem. Ezra, a priest, was Israel's first great biblical and historical scholar. He is believed to have been the author not only of Ezra but also of 1 and 2 Chronicles, and probably Nehemiah as well. These books together present a full history of the nation of Israel from a priestly perspective, starting with Adam and ending with the restoration of the Jewish nation after the exile. The following outline of Ezra is adapted from Nelson's complete book of Bible maps and charts, The Restoration of the Temple, Ezra 1-6, The Reformation of the People, Ezra 7-10. The book of Ezra records the first two returns of Jerusalem and the restoration work that followed them. The first group of 50,000 captives returned under the leadership of Zerubbabel in 536 BC. This group undertook the task of rebuilding the temple soon after their return. Soon, discouragement set in and the work was stopped. About 20 years later, God raised up two prophets, Haggai and Zechariah, to motivate them to complete the work. They resumed work and completed the temple in 516 BC. A second group of about 2,000 captives returned 80 years later under the leadership of Ezra in 486 BC. They arrived to find that the condition of the nation's spiritual life was poor. The prophet Malachi reveals the nature of their sins. Cheating, stealing, foreign marriages, divorce, and violence were among the more notable sins. After Ezra prayed and confessed their sins, a great revival took place and the people rededicated themselves to the Lord. Nehemiah, the restoration of Jerusalem. The book of Nehemiah continues where Ezra leaves off. In the Hebrew Bible, Ezra and Nehemiah were one book. They were probably both written by Ezra as part of his comprehensive history of Israel. Whereas Ezra focuses on the restoration of the temple, Nehemiah focuses on the rebuilding of the city of Jerusalem. The following outline of Nehemiah is adapted from Norman Geisler. The reconstruction of the city, Nehemiah 1-7. The revival of the citizens, Nehemiah 8-13. The first half of the book reports how Nehemiah rebuilt the city of Jerusalem. He was a cupbearer to King Artaxerxes I. When he heard that Jerusalem was in ruins, he prayed earnestly for God's favor, then approached the king for permission to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the city. When he arrived in Jerusalem in 445 BC, he investigated the situation and then rallied the people to build. In spite of severe opposition from the surrounding peoples, the walls of the city were rebuilt in record time. After restoring the physical city, Nehemiah turned his attention to the need for spiritual reform. He gathered the people and had Ezra read the law of God to them. Then he led them in a prayer of repentance and helped them renew their covenant with the Lord. Finally, he commissioned them to repossess the cities God had given them under Joshua. Then he returned to Babylon. After a short while, he returned to Jerusalem again. Discovering that the people had not remained faithful to the Lord, he took serious measures to reform society and restore God's rule over them. Esther, the preservation of the nation. Whereas the books of Ezra and Nehemiah report what was happening in Jerusalem among the Jews who returned to their homeland after the exile, Esther describes how God protected those who remained in Persia from a vicious attempt to destroy them. Table 17 outlines the history of Israel in the post-exilic period and shows where the materials in Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther fit into the time frame. Date 536 to 515 BC. Ezra 1-6. Event return under Zerubbabel and rebuilding of the temple. 480 to 470 BC, Esther, preservation of the Jews who remained in Persia. 458 BC, Ezra 7 to 10, return under Ezra and reform of the people. 445 BC, Nehemiah 1 to 12, Nehemiah rebuilds the walls and renews the covenant. 433 BC, Nehemiah 13, Nehemiah corrects abuses of the covenant. Esther is one of the only two biblical books that do not mention God's name. Songs of Songs is the other. Nevertheless, it teaches us a great deal about Him. Its central message is that God is always at work behind the scenes, using what seems to be ordinary circumstances to fulfill His plans. Esther was young, Jewish girl, who was compelled to enter a competition to find a wife for King Xerxes. God allowed her to become a queen because He had a special plan for her life. Sometime later, all the Jews in Persia were about to be murdered. So Mordecai, Esther's uncle, told her that she had to speak to the king on their behalf. Up until that time, she had hidden the fact that she was Jewish. In the heat of the crisis, faith rose in her heart, and she rose up as a woman of God to save her people. Esther 4, verse 14 to 16. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to royal position for such a time as this? Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai, Go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maids will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. The story of Esther shows us that God is in control of everything that happens in our lives. Esther likely did not want to become the wife of King Xerxes. This was not her ideal plan for her life, yet God uses to fulfill His purpose for her life. He will do the same for you and me. Even when we feel that things have not worked out as we planned or dreamed, we can trust the Lord to use every circumstance for good. That is for His greater purpose for our lives.